Zixathara clicked his crystalline claws against the metal table and watched the holographic display show another fallen star system. The blue light made his six-limbed body shine like a jewel, but his mood was dark. In his 300 years of life, he had never seen anything like this. The Void Swarm had taken 12 systems in just 40 days. They moved like shadows through space, consuming everything they touched. Planets, moons, even stars disappeared into their dark hunger. Where once there were worlds full of life, now there was only empty blackness. Zixathara was the best military mind in the Keth Mori collective. His people were famous across the galaxy for their smart war tactics. They could calculate the perfect battle plan for any situation. Every move was planned. Every loss was measured. War was like a beautiful dance between opponents who both knew the steps. For 847 years, the Galactic Coalition had kept peace this way. When conflicts arose, species would meet on neutral ground. They would fight with agreed-upon rules. There were limits on weapons, limits on casualties, and limits on how long battles could last. It was civilized. It was logical. It worked. Until now. The Void Swarm did not follow any rules. They did not send diplomatic messages. They did not agree to meet on neutral ground. They simply came and consumed everything. The Coalition's careful battle tactics meant nothing to creatures that did not even seem to understand the concept of surrender. Zixathara's harmonic voice hummed with frustration as he spoke to the other Coalition leaders through his communicator. "The mathematical models are useless," he said. "These entities do not respond to logical warfare." The other voices that came back through the device shared his concern. The proud Veltari had lost their famous battle cruisers. The wise Mordun had seen their shield technology fail completely. Even the aggressive Ketrak found their warrior culture helpless against an enemy that felt no pain and knew no fear. Then came an unexpected transmission from a small blue planet on the edge of Coalition space. Earth. Zixathara had read about humans in the basic Coalition files. They were new members, barely 50 years in the Coalition. Their technology was simple compared to other species. Their society seemed chaotic and emotional. Most Coalition members considered them a minor species that would need centuries to become truly useful. The human message was simple. "We volunteer our military forces to fight the Void Swarm." Zixathara almost laughed. The sound came out as a crystalline chime that rang through his command center. Humans wanted to fight an enemy that had destroyed the Coalition's best armies? It seemed like offering a sharp stick to fight a plasma cannon. But the Coalition was desperate. Every traditional weapon had failed. Every careful strategy had been useless. The Coalition Council decided to accept the human offer, if only to buy time while they developed new weapons. Zixathara received orders to work with the human forces as a military advisor. His job was to help them understand Coalition warfare and keep them from getting killed too quickly. It seemed like a waste of his time, but orders were orders. The human ships arrived at the Coalition staging area 3 days later. Zixathara expected to see advanced technology, sophisticated weapons, and organized military formations like other Coalition species used. Instead, he saw something that confused him. The human vessels looked rough and practical. They had no elegant curves like Veltari ships or crystal formations like Keth Mori craft. They looked like tools made for hard work rather than beautiful art. Their gray metal surfaces showed scratches and repair marks. Some even had pictures painted on their sides, images of strange creatures with teeth and wings. When the human commander came aboard Zixathara's ship, the confusion grew worse. Commander Sarah Chen was small compared to most Coalition species. She wore simple cloth uniforms instead of energy shields or ceremonial armor. Her weapons were basic projectile throwers rather than energy beams or plasma bursts. "Honored Commander Chen," Zixathara said, using the proper Coalition greeting ceremony. We welcome your species to this conflict. Please understand that the enemy is unlike anything in our military databases. They do not follow standard warfare protocols." Chen nodded and said, "We've read your files on the Void Swarm. We know they're tough. That's okay. We've fought tough enemies before." Zixthara tilted his head, a gesture that showed confusion in his species. "Your files indicate limited military experience. Most of your conflicts have been against your own species on a single planet." "That's right," Chen said without shame. "We've had plenty of practice fighting wars." The way she said it made Zixthara uncomfortable, though he could not understand why. There was something in her voice that his logical mind could not process. It was not fear or excitement or anger. It was something else entirely. Over the next few days, Zixthara observed human preparations for battle. What he saw made no sense according to coalition military science. The humans spent time writing on paper and sending messages to their home planet. They shared personal items with each other and looked at small pictures. Some even performed strange vocal ceremonies together. "This emotional behavior will compromise their combat effectiveness," Zixthara noted in his daily report. "Humans appear to form inappropriate personal attachments that will interfere with logical decision-making." But as he watched more carefully, Zixthara began to notice something strange. The emotional behavior was not random. It followed patterns he could not understand. When humans talked about their homes and families, they became more focused, not less. When they shared personal items, they worked together better, not worse. Most confusing of all was their attitude toward death. Coalition species calculated acceptable losses as percentages and mathematical probabilities. Humans talked about death as if it was personal. They seemed to understand that they might die, but they prepared for battle anyway. The night before the attack on Zerion 7, Zixthara asked Commander Chen about this behavior. "Your species appears to have an illogical relationship with mortality. How do you maintain combat effectiveness when emotional attachments create fear of death?" Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Maybe that's exactly why we fight so hard. When you have something worth dying for, you also have something worth killing for." Zixthara did not understand what she meant. He would learn soon enough. The briefing room smelled wrong to Zixthara. Most coalition military meetings had no smell at all because different species had different scent sensitivities. But humans filled their spaces with the odors of their bodies, their food, and their equipment. It was disturbing and somehow alive. Commander Chen stood at the front of the room showing tactical displays of Zerion 7. The mining colony had been taken by the Void Swarm 6 days ago. 15,000 colonists were missing, probably consumed. The mission was simple: retake the colony and establish a forward base for further operations. Zixthara studied the human officers around the table. They did not sit in neat rows like coalition forces would. Instead, they clustered in small groups, talking quietly among themselves. Some drank hot liquids from containers. Others chewed on food while reviewing data. Their casual behavior seemed unprofessional by coalition standards. "The enemy has fortified the main colony buildings," Chen said, pointing to the hologram. "They've also spread into the mining tunnels underground. Intelligence suggests approximately 3,000 Void Swarm entities on site." A human with gray hair and scars on his face spoke up. "What about civilian survivors, Commander?" "Unlikely," Chen replied. "The swarm doesn't take prisoners." The scarred human nodded grimly. Other humans around the table showed similar expressions. Zixthara recognized anger in their faces, but it was controlled anger, focused anger. This seemed contradictory to what he knew about emotional responses in combat situations. Chen continued the briefing. "We'll coordinate with coalition forces for the initial assault. Lieutenant Martinez will lead Alpha Squad through the eastern approach. Captain Thompson takes Bravo Squad around the North Ridge. I'll take Charlie Squad straight through the main entrance. Zixthara's crystalline body chimed with concern. Commander Chen, this plan lacks mathematical precision. Where are the calculated casualty projections? What are the acceptable loss parameters for each squad? The room became quiet. Human faces turned toward Zixthara with expressions he could not read. Finally, Chen said, "We don't calculate acceptable losses, advisor. We plan to bring everyone home." "But that is tactically impossible," Zixthara said. "Military science requires loss calculations to determine optimal strategy." An older human woman with short gray hair leaned forward. "Son, we've been fighting wars since before your species discovered space travel. We know what we're doing." Zixthara felt confused by being called son, since his species did not reproduce in the same way humans did. More confusing was the confidence in the woman's voice. She spoke as if she had personal experience with many battles, but her files showed she was only a supply officer. After the briefing, Zixthara followed the humans as they prepared for battle. What he saw challenged everything he understood about logical military preparation. Squad leaders gathered their soldiers in small circles. They did not review tactical data or check equipment. Instead, they talked about personal things. One group shared photographs of small humans. Children, Zixthara realized. Another group performed a vocal ritual that seemed to have religious meaning. Lieutenant Martinez, a young human with dark skin and bright eyes, showed his squad pictures of a human female. "This is Maria," he said. "We're getting married when I get back. I promised her I'd make it home." The other soldiers in his squad made positive sounds and touched Martinez on his shoulders and arms. This physical contact seemed to make them all feel better, though Zixthara could not understand why. Captain Thompson's squad was different. These were older humans with more scars and harder expressions. They did not share pictures or perform rituals. Instead, they checked their weapons multiple times and spoke in quiet voices about previous battles. "Remember Baghdad," one said to another. "Stay low, move fast, watch your corners." "Always," the other replied. Zixthara tried to research what Baghdad meant in the human military database. The files he found disturbed him. Baghdad was apparently a location on Earth where humans had fought other humans for several years. The casualty numbers were enormous by coalition standards, but humans spoke about it as just one conflict among many. The weapons preparation also confused Zixthara. Humans carried simple projectile weapons alongside their energy weapons. They packed explosive devices, cutting tools, and even sharp metal blades. When Zixthara asked why they needed such primitive weapons, Sergeant Williams, an older human with gray hair, laughed. "Sometimes the old ways work best," Williams said. "Besides, you never know what you'll need in a fight." Most disturbing was the medical preparation. Coalition forces carried automated healing devices that could treat most combat injuries. Humans carried similar devices, but they also carried supplies for manual medical treatment. They seemed to expect that their soldiers would be severely wounded, but continue fighting anyway. "Your species appears to plan for extended combat effectiveness, even after significant physical damage," Zixthara observed to Commander Chen. "This suggests either poor protective equipment or unusual pain tolerance." Chen checked her equipment one more time before answering. "Both, probably, but we've learned that sometimes you have to keep fighting even when you're hurt. The mission doesn't stop just because you're bleeding." That night, Zixthara watched human soldiers prepare personal items. Many wrote messages on paper and sealed them in containers. Others recorded audio messages on their communication devices. When Zixthara asked about this behavior, a young soldier explained. "These are for our families if we don't make it back," the soldier said. "We want them to know we were thinking about them." "But this behavior acknowledges the possibility of death," Zixthara said. "Doesn't that reduce combat effectiveness?" The soldier looked at Zixathara with an expression that seemed almost pitying. "No, sir. It reminds us what we're fighting for." As the humans settled down for rest before the battle, Zixathara studied their behavior patterns. Some slept immediately, as if they could control their unconscious state at will. Others stayed awake, staring at pictures or reading messages from home. A few gathered in small groups and talked quietly about things unrelated to combat. This chaotic mixture of emotional behavior and practical preparation made no sense according to coalition military psychology. Soldiers should be focused only on tactical objectives. Personal attachments created vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit. Fear of death reduced aggressive combat behavior. But as Zixathara observed more carefully, he began to see something unexpected. The humans who showed the most emotional attachment to their homes and families also showed the most determination to complete the mission. The soldiers who wrote the most personal messages also spent the most time checking their equipment and reviewing tactical plans. It was as if their emotional connections made them more committed to battle, not less. Commander Chen found Zixathara reviewing tactical data late that night. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "I do not require sleep in the same way humans do," Zixathara replied. "I am trying to understand your species' approach to combat psychology." Chen sat down across from him. "What's confusing you?" "Your soldiers display emotional behavior that should compromise their effectiveness, yet they appear more committed to the mission because of it. This contradicts established military science." Chen was quiet for a moment. "Maybe your military science doesn't account for what happens when people fight for something they love instead of something they're ordered to protect." Zixathara thought about this as he prepared his own equipment for the coming battle. Tomorrow, he would finally see how human emotional chaos translated into actual combat effectiveness. He suspected he was about to learn something that would change everything he thought he knew about warfare. The first wave of coalition forces moved against Xerion 7 exactly as planned. Veltari energy weapons opened the attack from long range. Mordun shield generators protected advancing troops. Ketrak warriors charged the outer defenses with their traditional battle cries. Everything followed standard coalition warfare protocols. The Void Swarm destroyed them all in 18 minutes. Zixathara watched from the command ship as perfect military formations dissolved into chaos. The enemy moved unlike anything in coalition databases. They flowed like liquid shadow, appearing where they should not be, attacking from impossible angles. Their weapons drained energy from coalition shields and turned it back against the attackers. "Retreat immediately," the coalition admiral ordered. "All forces fall back to minimum safe distance." But there would be no safe distance if this continued. The Void Swarm was learning. Each coalition tactic they encountered, they adapted to and overcame. Soon they would be unstoppable. Commander Chen's voice came through the communication system. "Coalition Command, this is Human Task Force Omega, requesting permission to engage." "Negative," the Admiral replied. "The enemy has proven superior to our best forces. Stand down until new tactics can be developed." "Sir," Chen said, and Zixathara heard something in her voice that made his crystalline body vibrate with unease. "Request permission to engage freely, no restrictions." There was silence on the communication channel. Finally, the Admiral said, "You are authorized to engage without protocol restrictions. Goddess help you." Zixathara monitored human communications as their forces moved toward Xerion 7. What he heard confused him. The organized briefing structure was gone. Instead, squad leaders spoke to their soldiers like they were family members. "All right, people," Lieutenant Martinez said to his squad. "We know what these things did to the colonists. We know what they'll do to our homes if we don't stop them here. Let's make sure they regret coming to our galaxy." The response from his soldiers was not a proper acknowledgement. It was a sound that Zixthara had never heard before, a mixture of anger, determination, and something else he could not identify. It made him uncomfortable. Captain Thompson's communication was different. "Stay alive. Kill everything that moves. Go home to your families. That's the mission." "Hurrah," his soldiers replied. The word meant nothing to Zixthara, but the way they said it made his sensors detect elevated stress hormones and increased heart rates among the humans. They were deliberately making themselves more aggressive. The human approach to Zerion 7 followed none of the patterns from their briefing. Instead of organized formations, they moved in small groups that seemed to operate independently. Instead of direct routes, they used terrain that coalition forces would consider impassable. Alpha Squad disappeared into a canyon that offered no tactical advantage. Bravo Squad spread out across a ridgeline where they would be easy targets. Charlie Squad moved directly toward the heaviest enemy concentration with no support. "Their tactical deployment is suicidal," Zixthara reported to Coalition Command. "Human forces are violating basic military principles." But as he continued watching, something unexpected happened. Alpha Squad emerged from the canyon behind enemy positions. They had not been destroyed. They had been using the terrain to hide their movement. Bravo Squad was not exposed on the ridgeline. They were using elevated positions to coordinate attacks with other squads. Charlie Squad's direct approach was the most confusing. They moved straight toward the enemy with no attempt to find cover. Void swarm entities converged on them, just as tactical analysis predicted. Then Charlie's squad did something that made Zixthara's logical mind stop functioning properly. They ran toward the enemy even faster. "Contact front!" Commander Chen's voice came through the communication system. "Alpha Squad, execute flanking maneuver. Bravo Squad, suppressive fire on my mark. Charlie Squad, we're going straight through them." The battle that followed was unlike anything in coalition military history. Humans did not maintain formation. They did not follow predetermined attack patterns. They moved like predators hunting prey, constantly adapting to enemy movement and using terrain in ways that seemed impossible. When Void Swarm entities tried to surround Alpha Squad, the humans split into even smaller groups and attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. When enemy weapons began draining energy from human equipment, the humans switched to projectile weapons and explosive devices. Most shocking of all, when human soldiers were wounded, they continued fighting. Zixthara watched a human with severe injuries crawl toward enemy positions, while other soldiers provided covering fire. Coalition medical protocols required immediate evacuation for such injuries, but the human kept fighting until he physically could not continue. "Squad leader down!" someone shouted over the communication system. "Martinez is hit!" another voice called. But instead of retreating or calling for medical evacuation, the surviving squad members fought harder. They moved faster, took more risks, and showed levels of aggression that made Zixthara's sensors overload with stress readings. The battle reached a critical point when Void Swarm reinforcements arrived through underground tunnels. Coalition tactical analysis indicated that human forces were now outnumbered 3-1 and surrounded. Standard military doctrine required immediate withdrawal. Instead, Commander Chen ordered her forces to advance. "All squads, the colony building is 50 meters ahead," she said. "Whatever happens, we don't let these things keep what belongs to humans. Push forward." What happened next would remain in Zixthara's memory files forever. Human soldiers, wounded and outnumbered, attacked the enemy with weapons, with tools, and when those were gone, with their bare hands. They used explosives not just as weapons, but as tools to change the battlefield itself, collapsing tunnels and redirecting enemy movement. Sergeant Williams, the older human who had joked about primitive weapons, found himself surrounded by Void Swarm entities with no ammunition left. Zixthara watched through the monitoring system as Williams pulled out a sharp metal blade and attacked creatures that had destroyed Coalition battlecruisers. He should have died in seconds. Instead, he killed 3 of them before reinforcements arrived. The most disturbing moment came when Alpha Squad discovered they were trapped in a tunnel system with no escape route. Void swarm forces were converging on their position from all directions. Tactical analysis showed zero probability of survival. Lieutenant Martinez, wounded and barely conscious, spoke into his communication device. "Command! Alpha Squad is trapped in Tunnel Section 7. We're going to make sure these things don't use these tunnels to flank the other squads." "Understood, Alpha Squad," Commander Chen replied. "It's been an honor serving with you." Martinez looked at his remaining soldiers. "You heard the commander. Let's make some noise." They detonated all their remaining explosives simultaneously. The tunnel system collapsed, killing Alpha Squad instantly. It also trapped 200 void swarm entities underground and prevented them from attacking the other human forces. Zixthara stared at his monitoring displays in shock. The humans had deliberately killed themselves to gain a tactical advantage. No coalition species had ever developed such behavior. It was mathematically inefficient and emotionally destructive. It was also devastatingly effective. With the tunnel system collapsed and enemy reinforcements trapped underground, the remaining human forces overran the void swarm positions. They moved through the colony buildings with methodical precision, eliminating every enemy entity they found. But they did not stop when organized resistance ended. They hunted down individual void swarm creatures hiding in storage areas and maintenance tunnels. They searched every room, every corridor, every possible hiding place. When the battle was officially over, human soldiers continued searching for 6 more hours. They would not stop until they were certain that every enemy entity was dead. Commander Chen's final report was simple. Zerion 7 is secure. No enemy survivors detected. Colony ready for reoccupation. She did not mention the cost. 37 human soldiers had died retaking a colony that coalition forces had abandoned as lost. By coalition standards, this was an acceptable casualty rate for a successful operation. But Zixthara had watched human soldiers write letters to their families before the battle. He had seen them share personal photographs and make promises to return home. Those 37 dead humans were not statistics in a tactical calculation. They were individuals who would never see their families again, and their fellow humans had fought harder because of it, not despite it. For the first time in his 300 years of life, Zixthara began to understand what terror felt like. 3 days after Zerion 7, Zixthara could not stop thinking about what he had witnessed. His logical mind tried to process the human tactical methods, but the data did not fit into any known military frameworks. So he decided to research human military history more thoroughly. What he found in the Earth databases horrified him. The first shock came from the numbers. Humans had fought wars for thousands of years, but the scale of their conflicts made coalition warfare look like children playing games. Individual human battles had casualty counts higher than total coalition military losses in the past century. A place called Stalingrad had cost over 2 million human lives in a single battle. A conflict called World War II had killed between 70 and 85 million humans in just 6 years. These numbers were so large that Zixthara had to check his translation software multiple times to make sure he was reading correctly. But the numbers were just the beginning. Humans had developed weapons specifically designed to kill other humans as efficiently as possible. They had created poison gases that caused slow, painful death. They had built machines that could kill thousands of people in minutes. They had even developed weapons that could destroy entire cities instantly. More disturbing were the psychological tactics. Humans had studied how to break enemy morale, how to spread fear, and how to make opponents surrender through terror rather than tactical defeat. They understood warfare not just as physical combat, but as mental and emotional destruction. Zixthara found files describing something called total war, conflicts where humans attacked not just enemy soldiers, but entire enemy populations. They destroyed farms to create famine, bombed factories to cripple production, and targeted civilian areas to break enemy will to fight. The most shocking discovery was that humans had rules about how to fight wars. Documents called the Geneva Conventions listed things that humans were not supposed to do to enemies, even in combat. At first, Zixthara thought these were signs of human moral development. Then he realized the truth. These were not rules about how to fight. They were rules about how to limit human fighting instincts. Humans had to create laws to prevent themselves from being too savage in combat. The prohibited behaviors listed in these documents made Zixthara's crystalline structure vibrate with fear. Torture, execution of prisoners, collective punishment, deliberate targeting of medical facilities. These were all natural human combat behaviors that had to be legally banned. Other species had never needed such laws because they had never developed such behaviors in the first place. Zixthara requested access to more detailed human military files. What he found changed his understanding of what humans really were. Earth military history was filled with conflicts that lasted for decades. Humans had fought generation-long wars where parents passed hatred for enemies to their children. They had conflicts based on differences in religion, skin color, political beliefs, and even access to natural resources. Humans had enslaved other humans. They had committed genocide against entire populations. They had developed systematic methods for exterminating people they considered undesirable. Most terrifying of all, they had done these things to their own species. When Zixthara reviewed recordings from recent human military operations, he began to see patterns that made sense in this new context. The methodical way humans had hunted down Void Swarm survivors was not unusual behavior. It was standard human military doctrine called mop-up operations. The willingness of human soldiers to sacrifice themselves for tactical advantage was not emotional instability. It was a calculated military tactic that humans had refined over thousands of years of warfare. The way humans continued fighting when wounded was not courage. It was evolutionary adaptation from a species that had spent millennia killing and being killed by other humans. Zixthara began monitoring human communications more carefully during subsequent operations against the Void Swarm. What he heard confirmed his new understanding. When human soldiers talked about enemy forces, they used language that other coalition species reserved for natural disasters or diseases. Void Swarm entities were not opponents to be defeated. They were threats to be eliminated completely. "We need to make sure none of them get away," Sergeant Williams said during a briefing. "If even one of these things escapes, it could start a new infestation somewhere else." The word infestation disturbed Zixthara. Coalition species referred to enemy forces as opposing military units or adversarial entities. Humans spoke about them like they were dangerous animals that needed to be exterminated. During cleanup operations, Zixthara watched human soldiers systematically search for wounded Void Swarm entities. When they found them, they did not attempt capture for interrogation or intelligence gathering. They eliminated them immediately. "Check that body," Commander Chen ordered when her squad found what appeared to be a dead Void Swarm creature. The soldier approached carefully, confirmed the entity was still alive but badly wounded, and shot it without hesitation. "Confirmed kill," he reported. This behavior violated coalition warfare protocols, which required attempts to preserve enemy wounded for intelligence purposes. But when Zixthara mentioned this to Commander Chen, her response chilled him. "These things don't surrender and they don't negotiate," she said. "The only good Void Swarm entity is a dead one. That's not cruelty, that's smart tactics." The casual way she said it made Zixthara realize that humans viewed total extermination as a normal military objective. They were not trying to defeat the Void Swarm. They were trying to make the Void Swarm extinct. This approach began affecting other coalition species. Veltari commanders started requesting permission to eliminate rather than defeat enemy forces. Modern tacticians began studying human historical battles for new strategic ideas. Even peaceful species like the Trenki began developing weapons designed for complete destruction rather than tactical advantage. The change that disturbed Zix-Thara most was in his own species. Kethmori military academies began teaching courses on human-style warfare. Young Kethmori officers studied Earth battles and learned to think about combat in ways their species had never considered before. During a strategy meeting with other coalition advisors, Zix-Thara heard a young Kethmori officer suggest using psychological pressure tactics against the Void Swarm. When asked what he meant, the officer described methods that were clearly based on human torture techniques from Earth's military history. "We could capture individual entities and make examples of them," the young officer said. "If we can make the others afraid, they might retreat without further combat." An older Kethmori commander rejected this suggestion. But Zix-Thara noticed that other officers seemed interested. Humans were not just fighting alongside coalition forces. They were teaching coalition species how to think like humans. The most terrifying moment came during Zix-Thara's review of a recent human combat operation. He watched Sergeant Williams lead his squad in an assault on a Void Swarm position. When one of Williams's soldiers was killed by enemy fire, the sergeant's behavior changed completely. Williams stopped following tactical plans. He stopped communicating with other squads. He moved toward the enemy position with single-minded focus, using weapons, explosives, and finally his bare hands to kill every Void Swarm entity he could reach. When the position was secure, Williams knelt beside his dead soldier and spoke quietly to the body. Then he stood up, checked his equipment, and continued with the mission as if nothing had happened. Zix-Thara realized he had witnessed something that no coalition species possessed: the ability to channel grief directly into combat effectiveness. Williams had not been overcome by emotion. He had been powered by it. Later, Zix-Thara asked Commander Chen about this behavior. "Your soldiers appear to fight more aggressively when their companions are killed. This seems counterproductive to unit morale." Chen looked at him with an expression he was beginning to recognize. The look humans gave when they thought someone had missed something obvious. "Loss makes us angry," she said. "Anger makes us dangerous. Our enemies killed our friends, so now we kill them harder. It's not complicated." But it was complicated, because it meant that human military effectiveness actually increased when they suffered casualties. Every human soldier killed made the surviving humans more committed to total victory. Zix-Thara began to understand that humans did not view war as a tactical problem to be solved. They viewed it as a personal conflict to be won at any cost, and they were teaching this approach to the rest of the galaxy. For the first time since joining the coalition military, Zix-Thara wondered if humanity's allies should be more afraid of humans than humanity's enemies were. 6 months after the first human engagement with the Void Swarm, the war was over. The enemy that had seemed unstoppable was completely eliminated from coalition space. Every Void Swarm entity was dead. Every portal they had used was destroyed. Every trace of their presence was wiped from the galaxy. The victory celebration on Coalition Central was magnificent. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered to honor the successful defense of their civilization. But Zix-Thara did not feel like celebrating. The galaxy was safe, but it was no longer the same galaxy. Coalition military doctrine had been completely rewritten. The old rules about limited warfare and acceptable casualties were declared obsolete. Every species was required to study human military tactics and implement them in their own forces. The Veltari, once known for elegant energy weapons, were now developing projectile weapons and explosive devices. The peaceful Morden had established their first military torture research facility. Even the Trenki, who had never fought a war in their species' history, were training soldiers in human-style combat techniques. Zixthera walked through the Coalition Military Museum, where new exhibits displayed captured human weapons and equipment. Visitors studied primitive human tools like knives and projectile weapons with fascination and horror. Children of various species listened to lectures about human military history and learned about concepts like total war and psychological warfare. In the center of the museum was a holographic display showing the final battle against the Void Swarm. Visitors could watch human soldiers systematically eliminate every enemy entity in a captured star system. The display emphasized the thoroughness of human military methods: no survivors, no mercy, no possibility of enemy return. The museum guide, a young Kethmori female, explained to a group of visitors, "Human warfare doctrine teaches us that true victory requires complete elimination of enemy capability and will to fight. Half measures lead to future conflicts." Zixthara recognized the words. They were from a human military manual that was now required reading in Coalition academies. The real change became clear when Zixthara attended a Coalition Defense Committee meeting. The topics discussed would have been unthinkable before human involvement in galactic affairs. Proposal 77 Alpha, the committee chair announced. Establishment of Coalition interrogation facilities for enhanced prisoner processing. The Veltari representative raised a tentacle. What techniques will be authorized for information extraction? All methods approved by human military advisors, came the reply. Effectiveness has been demonstrated in multiple Earth conflicts. Zixthera knew what this meant. Coalition forces were about to begin using human torture techniques as standard military procedure. Proposal 77 Beta, the chair continued. Preemptive strike authorization against species showing potential for future hostility. This was even worse. The Coalition was adopting human concepts of preventive warfare, attacking enemies before they became actual threats. It was efficient, but it meant the end of diplomatic solutions to conflicts. The most disturbing proposal came last. Proposal 77 Gamma, establishment of Coalition strategic extermination protocols for threats classified as existential. The committee voted to approve all three proposals unanimously. After the meeting, Zixthera requested a private interview with Commander Chen. She had been promoted to Coalition strategic advisor and now helped plan military doctrine for all member species. Her office was simple and practical, decorated only with pictures of human soldiers who had died in the Void Swarm War. "You wanted to see me, Advisor Zixthera?" Chen asked. "I need to understand something," Zixthera said. "Before humans joined Coalition space, we had peace for 800 years. Conflicts were limited and civilized. Now we are developing torture facilities and planning extermination protocols. What have you done to us?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was tired. "We didn't do anything to you. We showed you what war really looks like." "But the old ways worked," Zixthera insisted. "We had peace." "You had luxury," Chen corrected. "You could afford to play nice because you never faced a real threat. The Void Swarm was real. They would have killed every living thing in this galaxy if we hadn't stopped them. But the methods you used were necessary," Chen said firmly. "You think we're monsters because we know how to fight wars. But we're not fighting because we're violent. We're violent because we're fighting for something worth protecting." Zixthara's crystalline structure vibrated with confusion. "I do not understand the distinction." Chen stood up and walked to her window, which showed the busy traffic of Coalition Central. Ships from hundreds of species moved peacefully through space, carrying cargo and passengers between worlds. "Look out there," she said. "Every ship, every station, every world in this galaxy exists because we were willing to do terrible things to terrible enemies. Peace isn't free. Someone has to pay the price in blood. But now every Coalition species is learning to pay that price," Zixthara said. "We are all becoming like humans." Chen turned back to face him. "Good. Maybe now you'll be ready for the next threat. The words sent ice through Zixthara's logical circuits. What next threat? There's always a next threat, Chen said. The Void Swarm came from outside our galaxy. What makes you think they were the only ones out there? What makes you think they were the worst ones? Zixthara had never considered this possibility. Coalition databases showed no evidence of other extragalactic threats, but human databases were full of unexpected enemies and sudden wars. Your species assumes there will be more conflicts, he said. Our species prepares for more conflicts, Chen corrected. That's why we survive. Chen sat back down and activated her computer display. I've been reviewing coalition expansion patterns over the past millennium. You've been very successful at peaceful exploration and diplomatic contact. You've built a beautiful civilization. The display showed the growth of coalition space over centuries, steady, peaceful expansion through negotiation and alliance. But you've also been very lucky, Chen continued. Every species you've encountered has been reasonable and open to negotiation. You've never met anyone who wanted to destroy you just because you existed. Such species would be illogical, Zixthara said. Logic is a luxury, Chen replied. Survival is a necessity. And survival sometimes requires doing illogical things to illogical enemies. She changed the display to show recent coalition military developments. New weapon designs based on human technology, training programs teaching human combat tactics, research facilities developing enhanced interrogation methods. What you call becoming like humans, I call becoming ready for reality, Chen said. The universe is a dangerous place. Pretty civilizations don't survive unless someone ugly is willing to protect them. Zixthara studied the display data. Coalition military spending had increased by 400% since the Void Swarm War. Peaceful species were developing weapons of mass destruction. Diplomatic services were being restructured to include intelligence gathering and covert operations. Are you proud of these changes? He asked. Chen was quiet again. When she answered, Zixthara heard something in her voice that he had never heard before. Sadness. No, she said. I'm not proud, but I'm not ashamed either. We gave your galaxy the tools it needs to survive. What you do with those tools is up to you. And if we become as violent as humans, then you'll live long enough to maybe become peaceful again, Chen said. The alternative is extinction. Zixthara left the meeting with more questions than answers. Over the following days, he researched human military philosophy more thoroughly. What he found was both disturbing and fascinating. Humans had a concept called peace through strength. The idea that true peace could only exist when potential aggressors were too afraid to start conflicts. They believed that civilized behavior was only possible when civilization was protected by those willing to be uncivilized. More importantly, humans understood that this protection came with a cost. Their military forces were kept separate from civilian populations precisely because warriors changed people. Human soldiers were honored for their sacrifice, but they were also isolated from the peaceful society they protected. Coalition species were learning this lesson too late. They were training entire populations in human warfare methods without understanding the psychological cost. Soon, every coalition world would be full of citizens who thought like human soldiers. Zixthara completed his final report on human military integration with mixed feelings. The galaxy was safer than it had ever been. Coalition forces could now defeat any conceivable threat. But the price of that safety was the end of the innocent, peaceful civilization that had existed for centuries. His last paragraph summarized everything he had learned. Recommendation: establish permanent human advisory positions in coalition military command. Human warfare methods are essential for galactic defense, but they require human guidance to prevent complete militarization of coalition society. Humans understand the balance between necessary violence and preserved civilization because they have spent thousands of years learning to live with both. Without their guidance, We risk becoming effective warriors, but losing everything that made us worth protecting. As Zixthara submitted his report, he realized that humans had given the Coalition the greatest gift possible, the ability to survive in a dangerous universe. They had also given them the greatest burden possible, the responsibility to remain civilized while being prepared for uncivilized actions. The galaxy was safer now, but it would never be innocent again. And perhaps, Zixthara thought, as he watched human and Coalition ships patrol together through space, that was exactly what it needed to survive.